Hello from COP26. I'm PHOEBE KOUNDOURI, professor in economics and director of the Cluster of Sustainability Transition, an international cluster of research and innovation institutions that are working on devising pathways, technological, financial, economic, and policy pathways for the transition to sustainability, for the transition to SDGs implementation and European Green Deal implementation. It is true that Europe is a leadership example. It is a leadership example here in COP because it has already put into laws and regulations the climate neutrality commitment by 2050, and does a lot on biodiversity preservation and restoration, and of course tries to achieve a recovery from the current health pandemic that is going to be sustainable. The Mediterranean region within Europe is a region that can really act as an example, again, a leadership example of combining the developed European world with the developing world, extending the relevance of Northern Africa to all the countries that are part of the Global South, and showcase how these transition pathways, the economic, the technological, and the policy pathways can be sketched by stakeholder engagement and technology providers engagement and policy engagement and political engagement. And of course, science-driven sketching of the pathways that are relevant for both the developed and the developing world. This is what is so interesting about the Mediterranean, is that it combines the two worlds. It can bring knowledge, transfer knowledge from the developed world to the developing world, and showcase how we can have a really inclusive transformation of our world towards sustainability implementation in a way that it will protect the environment and biodiversity, and at the same time achieve positive growth multipliers, job creation, and social cohesion. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Answering the questions raised by Cassandra Conference require a combined effort at different international and national levels and from different perspectives. As a Palestinian, let me talk about the national level, both cooperation and coordination among stakeholders, which is needed. Those involved in climate change are Environmental Quality Authority, the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Local Governorate, Ministry of Transport, the Palestinian Energy and Natural Resources Authority, and the Palestinian Water Authority, whom I'm presenting. Some specific and more technical policies and strategies have been produced by BWA, just as mitigation measures for climate change, action plan and budget, which was produced in 2012. For the main topics raised in Palestine regarding climate change, we have climate change and drought management in Palestine, challenges, solution, disaster risk management, droughts, floods, hazards, extreme weather events, also modeling of climate change and the impact of climate change on water resources, awareness regarding climate change, and finally, the role of media to increase awareness on local, regional, and international communities. We also focus on gender and climate change. We have noticed the importance of climate change related to gender. So when talking especially about water, wastewater, and waste, we conclude that women are underrepresented across the water sector as employees and decision makers. Hygiene and sanitation in Palestinian refugee camps is especially poor. Inadequate water, sanitation, hygiene facilities expose women and girls to threats and burdens associated with the meeting their personal hygiene needs. Also, leadership and decision-making rules analyzing the impact of climate change and the social and the economic consequence of mitigation from gender perspective. So increase in women access to finance, technology, capacity building, and mainstream gender strategy with all national adaptation strategy and action plans. For financing the climate change action, the priority actions in national authorities in Palestine could be implemented to facilitate the access to funding from international institutions and all other financial partners. We have to develop and apply the internal policies, strategies, and procedures. Also, the coordination with the Israeli as the continuation of the work under the Item 14 of Oslo Agreement and all its protocol, including Joint Water Committee and civil administration, make BWA face a number of constraints linked to the Israeli occupation, just as difficulties and restrictions accessing land and water resources, abnormal delays and difficulties important equipment, especially in Area C, which embeds implementing of infrastructure projects, though this coordination helped Palestine to facilitate access to project sites and also facilitates the flow of materials through the borders to the sites. Finally, taking necessary steps by responsible institutions to promote available funds and to enhance coordination and at all the levels. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to be moderating this exciting and stimulating panel today as part of the Cassandra Conference. We'll be talking for the next bit less than 2 hours about science and social consensus in the Mediterranean. I'm VITO LATERZA. I'm associate professor in development studies at the University of Agder, and I also write editorials and political commentary for Al Jazeera. And I'm very pleased to introduce our distinguished speakers today. We have PHOEBE KOUNDOURI, professors at the Athens University of Economics and Business, HADEEL FAIDI, head of water planning at the Palestinian Water Authority, Richard BERMAN, former dean of the Patel School of Global Sustainability at the University of South Florida, Dirk Kroll, executive director of Water Europe, and Serena Caucci, who's associate program officers at the United Nations University at the Institute for Integrated Management of Material Fluxes and of Resources. When we talk about the Mediterranean, sadly, and I say it as a proud Mediterranean citizen, I'm from southern Italy and, always aware of the great history of our region, and that has always been kind of a cradle of so many cultures and movements and ideas and so many important historical development, all the way from the east to the west to the northern and the southern sides of the Mediterranean. But when we say Mediterranean today, sadly, in the kind of global consciousness and perhaps even in our own, kind of self-consciousness as Mediterranean, we think about quite negative stuff. We think about a lot of conflicts, whether it's over sovereignty or resources. We think about desertification, major climate changes. We think about wars. We think about struggles over the rights to help people moving if they're running away from war or poverty. And also, we think a lot in terms about distrust, lack of trust. We think about no vax, even though Italy has some of the highest rates of vaccination. We think about the populist waves, and now we have lost trust in the, so-called establishment and the elites, as some, social media messages would like to put it. So I want to start perhaps there with our panelists today. So let's get at the core of it. We need to talk also about the positives, but what do you think are the challenges that really make it difficult today in the Mediterranean region to find an harmonious and productive relationship between science and society, to find social consensus that cuts across all sectors of society?
Are you
HADEEL?
addressing?
Yeah, yeah. Phoebe, would you like to start, please?
No, please go on.
You start. So.
Okay, well, I think in the Mediterranean, mainly we have the four main big crises that are the whole of the world. We have the pandemic at the moment. We have a huge economic crisis that derives from the pandemic. Of course, we have the climate crisis. And of course, we have the biodiversity collapse crisis. So all these four crises are everywhere around the world, and they are also very intense in the Mediterranean. Mediterranean has been historically a region with geopolitical tension, a region that has been vulnerable in terms of its climate and its biodiversity. And at the same time, a region that flourished for many, many years, and it's still one of the most important, I would say, at least cultural locations in the world. Now, when you're facing so many crises at one point in time, what is kind of important is to understand that your system, or the different systems that you are trying to put together, the economic system, the social system, technology, the interaction between all of them and between all of them and nature need to be transformed in order to work together in a sustainable way, in a way that they build on synergies, and they are clever in choosing the trade-offs. So a very interesting framework in which we can work in is the Agenda 2030 framework, where we have a very holistic, integrated, and I would argue systemic approach towards transforming our systems to sustainability. In 2019, during the Climate Week, as a representative of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we presented the 6 transformations that are needed for the implementation of the 17 SDGs. And there we argued that no SDG can be fully implemented without the others being implemented, and that in order to operationalize the implementation of the SDGs, you need to conceive them in 6 transformations, in 6 transformation priorities. First, education, gender inequality. Second, health, well-being, and demography. Third, energy decarbonization and sustainable industry. Fourth, sustainable use and production of food, land, water, and oceans. Sustainable cities and communities, and lastly, the digital revolution for sustainable development. So I would argue that we need to put our heads together to understand how we are going to transform this main 6 area of the interaction between nature, economy, and people. And not to speak too long on this first contribution, I would say that in order to transform our systems, we need science-driven, detailed development of pathways that are gonna get us from where we are today to where we want to go. Technological pathways, financial pathways, and policy pathways. I'll stop here.
Yeah, let me pick up on what Phoebe was saying, because I think what you're talking about is we can't any longer use our 20th century established systems and organization to solve the 21st century. The real problem that we have is everybody operates now in a silo. The scientists talk to scientists. The quote, environmentalist is a profession, only talk to environmentalists. economists only talk to economists. And there's a belief somewhere that this all leads in a straight line. Like if you knew the science, behavior would change. And we know there's a lot more in emotion, in financial incentives, in culture, in religion that affects people's knowledge. Because I know Coca-Cola is not good to drink doesn't mean that I've changed my behavior at all. And until we begin to bring the people together in a way that the people most affected are thinking through some of the definitions of the problems as well as the solutions, we will not see impactful, sustainable problems being solved. And the key is, can we develop a social platform that brings scientists, the public, the private, the most affected, the press, the arts, the culture, the religion, to the table at the same time, in the same place. And most often, the most success could be if you could do it locally. And we've never really developed a social platform or a place where that can happen. And I think that's the challenge for us.
Yeah, maybe I also pick up from there. Thank you, Richard. It's also that I want to mention maybe the fifth crisis, but is connected in one to the actionable solution that Phoebe was already talking on. It is the finite nature of our resources and how our economy deals with it. And the Mediterranean, in its structure, we have seen it that it's also geopolitically divided in terms of how also resources are distributed and the economics and also political roles that we are playing in. I don't want to put it really on, but on the colonization also of other lands. So we have seen it with the Cilician in the past, but now it's coming nowadays quite strongly. So I fully agree that working not in silos is the solution. Working among disciplines or between disciplines solution, but also we should use time and scale and see how either grassroots movement can take on, but also we would need a certain policy frame that would support and enhance a coherent policy that is around the Mediterranean, because we cannot think that individual good policy would make the difference. I think it has to be a concerted action, and I join then my other thoughts with Phoebe and Professor BERMAN.
Yeah. Well, perhaps from my side, I can only concur with what most of the speakers before me have already said. I think also as a Northern European, I mean, you cannot but recognize, I would say, the great historic wealth of the Mediterranean region, which I think has also led to a great degree of diversity in terms of traditions, in terms of languages, and also I think in terms of political systems. Yeah? And of course, many of the challenges that we have in front of us, I think a lot of technological solutions are already there. I mean, the issue most often is with the implementation, I would say with the governance, bringing everybody together, involving all the stakeholders. And there we have to find a solution. Now we know, I mean, of course, I'm particularly speaking from the water perspective. I mean, most of the water problems, they manifest them at the local level, but the solutions are, I would say, super regional and sometimes even beyond. So there, I think we have to work on both sides. We have to take local initiatives to bring everybody together, but also beyond that, I would say at regional level, at national level, at international level, around the Mediterranean, develop initiatives to bring everybody together and the rest of these challenges.
Adil, would you like to have your take on this?
Yeah, the Mediterranean region has a unique geographical, geopolitical, ecological, and cultural features. And the region also is challenged by natural and man-made conditions, including water scarcity, demographic changes, unemployment, poverty, also changing consumption need, environmental degradation, climate change, water-related natural disaster, and also gender disparities. All these challenges have significant implication for water availability and equality. For the provision of ecosystem services affecting as well the living conditions of the current and the future generation, and also affecting majority flows here. So the whole Mediterranean suffering, each country with their own challenges, but some have their political situation, some have their limited water resources. So maybe we have to study each country per half and then to combine all of them in order to have a good view of the comprehensive solution for all these challenges.
So talking about water, perhaps we get a bit more specific, also given some of the expertise here. So what are the main challenges? I think Dirk started to get, so we are getting an idea of the major crisis. I think Phoebe gave us a pretty good overview that we all hooked on. We're now hearing more about water, also from HADEEL and others. Dirk started on the challenges of this social science, social consensus and science. What are the other challenges? For instance, if you talk about water, why are we not managing, and why are we? What are we going to do about this crisis, and what are the obstacles towards this social platform that Richard mentioned?
Yeah, for water, we have a continuous demand, which is increased yearly, year after year, and the limited water resources, just like in Palestine, we don't have access to our water resource, neither we are limited to the quantity of water resources we have. So this is the main scarcity, we have the water scarcity. It's the main problem we are suffering in Palestine, to have enough water for the whole generation living now, and also for the future, because as you know, we are occupied from the Israeli. We just we don't have access to our main sources, just like the Jordan River. Also, the groundwater aquifers we are sharing it with the Israeli. They are controlling more than 76% of the groundwater. This makes the available water for Palestinians are very limited. So this is the main issue that we are suffering. And you know that the water is the secret of life, and it's the most important right to have for each citizen, to have access to water, to open the tap and to find water to drink, to eat, to clean his house, to clean himself. So we are forbidden to use one of the most important right, which is taking water and arriving to it.
Well, maybe please take me just to rebuttal, because I think this is a problem that under different aspects of the water scarcity, but also water quality issue is a problem that every country will be facing anytime soon. If not, we are already there, and Mediterranean itself is in one of those conditions. When we were speaking about why we cannot manage, is that we cannot manage, we have to find a way to manage it out, because we are water climate issue is wicked per se. It's a very complex problem that has also different layers of interactions from actors that are involved or affected to it, but also sectors that are leading to it. And each country has a different stake that should be considered as relevant as possible. But if we look into a vision, an holistic vision that is so-called our Mediterranean, then we have to look at different other ways on how to look for such stakes and manage them. I think this is where also the European Commission per se is already trying to do it. When we look, for example, at the new regulation of the water reuse in agriculture that now is trying to be implemented at the at the state level, that's already a way where we are trying to do. And I think we should expand this type of activities also to the Mediterranean. And that's where also the European Commission is opening now with the Green Deal also to a more comprehensive and inclusive way to look at to resources. So I think the path to go through is systemic thinking, but at the same time, open up to scale and time on which actions should be taken. Maybe I leave it from there to my colleagues.
Yeah, let me pick up on Serena, because I think you brought us right to a real important area, which is how do we change behavior? And whether it's on current use or change of quantity of use, or even know about quality, or change to a more compatible life with the earth. We know enough now that just knowing what is the right thing is not sufficient to necessarily change behavior. And I think we really have to talk about some of the economic or some of the political or some of the cultural barriers. Every one of my students starts with everybody's concerned with the environment. And if I make a t-shirt out of repurposed plastics or something, everybody will buy it rather than buying the other t-shirt. And almost every one of them, unfortunately, gets the experience that even their friends pick the other t-shirts because of size, fit, color, or whatever. And we have to learn and be realistic about we're asking people to change their behavior. And there is a reason, either economically, cultural, morally, patterns, family traditions, or whatever, that they have chosen to do this. And so until we understand and we're able to talk about, how big the population is, or meat diets, or petroleum use, I think we're going to be in trouble. And I think the other is that we don't trust people in other silos.
Yeah, but we also need to educate. I think we need to really raise awareness. I mean, I'm a believer of science, also evidences that there is a point where we could really transfer down science evidences onto also to the local level, really to bring it down to earth, let's say like that. This would become also something that people would start thinking and reasoning on. It's not behavior changes, it's nothing that would come from today to tomorrow, but we really need to put really our effort on including also a citizen itself or local community on actionables that are starting from the small scale and up to the global decision or European decision. Over.
Indeed, I see the power of empowering people, and empowering means that I transfer the knowledge, the awareness, so that people can engage in decision-making processes for the allocation of both the water quality and the quantity. And this is important. As an economist, what our way of thinking is that each and every person has a preference map. And this preference map, together with their budget constraints, defines their choices. And awareness and education changes the preferences. And as a result, choices change. And this is what both Serena, but also Richard were talking about. We need to empower the people to make choices that are informed. And this is the only way to change behavior. And this is a huge part of behavioral economics work. Lately, we received a big ERC synergy grant, a 10 million synergy grant that works exactly on that, bringing together economics and decision theory, behavioral economics and experimental economics, together with water engineering and control practices and machine learning, in order to understand how we can build the next generation of air by water systems, but at the same time, not only understand the issue from the infrastructure side, the supply side, but also understand the issue from the demand side, the behavioral side. And this is crucial, again, worldwide, but also for the Mediterranean. And it's also very important for urban structures, for cities, because by 2050, 75% of the population of the world will be living in cities. So the way we manage this resource is crucial. Now, going back, if you allow me another minute to HADEEL, what HADEEL said is that the allocation of water, because it is so precious for water production, for energy production, for food production, for energy production, for drinking, for irrigating, for almost all aspects of economic and social life, it has been always a huge geopolitical issue, irrespective of whether you had to manage a river or a lake or the distribution network and so on. So again, here we need adult conversations between governments. I think that the civil society has to start making explicit the demand that our leaders need to have adult conversations that avoid conflict and really pave the way to constructive collaboration. I don't know how we are going to do that, but I think we had enough of childish behavior that leads to war and suffering.
Well, I mean, to put it on that, I think going back to what Adil was saying, I think Phoebe is kind of doing full circle. So if we see Palestine as a bit of the dystopian future or what might happen in wealthier and more powerful areas of the Mediterranean, i.e. that Southern Europe is also going to run out of water, with the North doing far better, and with similar geopolitics, you know, as Southern Europe ignores Palestine, Northern Europe tends to also often ignore Southern Europe. So it's all good and well about the behavior, but pushing on Phoebe's point, there seems to be much bigger power issues here in geopolitics. You know, what do we do when we hear a whole population doesn't have access to water for pretty political reasons, not just environmental ones? You know, should we intervene? Is it our responsibility as well to take care of others in the Mediterranean, or do we just care about our own country and community?
Well, oops, sorry.
Adil, please.
Adil, please.
Yeah, of course, it's a whole group's responsibility, not only Palestinian. And we have previously and continuous working with the Pledging Conference from whole European countries and also USA to help us in negotiating with Israel to get our rights, to get access to helping us in overcome the obstacles with of bringing equipment inside Palestine or moving safely and easily between areas. Because as I don't know if you know exactly, Palestine is 3 areas: Area A, Area B, Area C. Area A is under the control of Palestinian state. B, it's combined between Israel and Palestine, and C, it's for Israel control only. And more than 76% of all West Bank is under control of Israel because they are Area C. So the pressure which can put from the Mediterranean countries to help us to get our rights, to help us to facilitate reaching our resources or facilitate the entrance of equipment or materials in order to improve our infrastructure, it's a whole process need cooperation and coordination between the whole Mediterranean. You can put a very good pressure on Israel to help us to improve our situation. Thank you.
Indeed, and it's not just Palestine, HADEEL. There are so many issues on border waters, so many issues on managing common pool resources. I mean, in Cyprus, in the Balkans, and even across Europe. Maybe they do not always lead to war, but it's so difficult to manage it. And there's where you can see the power of science. If you are a brave enough politician to say that I'm gonna leave the scientist, give me an allocation that is sustainable for both communities, irrespective of the differences between them, then I achieve a welfare increase in both countries. So this is the bigger step forward for me. Coordination and collaboration between nations in a way that puts aside the non-constructive vested interest. Sometimes it's okay to have some interest and fight for preserving them, but you should be clever enough to see what is constructive and for the welfare of people and not. And the welfare of people is what gives you strength as a nation, productive strength that can produce positive growth multipliers, can create jobs, can allow you fiscal pace for technological innovations and transformations, and at the end of the day can give you social cohesion. I know I speak very, it sounds easy, it's very difficult, but if you let the scientists talk between them and have a political decisions about allocation of very important research resources, I think it could be one way forward.
Maybe, Phoebe, I would say that I fully agree on the way our people should also, our politicians, our governments should be listening to science. But I am a believer that we as a scientist could provide tools and let then the politician pick up on a decision that they could manage in an integrated manner. I really believe that as we have our integrated approach in how we understand systems and allocate our resources, I think there is the other layer that is the politics that should then come in and take up in, well, if we are good enough in delivering the message that is comprehensible, because sometimes scientists are also, as Richard said, living on their own world. But if we are good, I think this would be possible. The problem is in, well, conflicts that are also related to internal pressures also of different locals and of course powers of the economy. Maybe let me touch on a topic that is really also on, I'm very interested on, that is also the effect of unsustainable management of our resources through that creates migration. So I'm very sure that if we could be that wise, as you said, Phoebe, on gathering together as a politician, as a government, and find a sustainable way on how to handle resources, we could also reduce the fluxes which are migration fluxes that are not given by normal migration, because migration is a natural phenomenon of our world, but the forced migration and displacement that instead are also caused now on top also of the climate change. So maybe we could even think of adding on, okay, stop being childish on it, but also facing the reality that maybe certain problems could mitigate itself if we could look at resource management in a more sustainable way. Over.
Going back to science, I'm actually totally with you. The science is very important in any process, in any operation. But what is most important for me as a strategic planner working with the government, that to have your science, water science, and to transfer it to industry of water. I want all the study you are doing, all of the effort you are putting in making as a policy about demand. I take the scenarios and I will take the best solutions to solve our main problem, to make our main strategy in the country, to solve access to water, to solve distribution, to solve fair quantity for each citizen. So science is the core of okay, but we don't enough having researchers on the shelves. We have to have more practical industrial researchers from the science.
Let me pick up on HADEEL, because I think it's really crucial that the potential bridge between science and, I will say, people is the social entrepreneur. It is science rarely, and all you scientists can correct me, but I'm trying to get it more lively here. VITO said we got to do something to pick it up. I believe science and most scientists and most universities are rewarding research, new discoveries, new ways to do things, publications, etc., and actually play down implementation or applied research. And for many of our problems today, we have enough science that could lead us to predicting, working around Serena's idea of being able to predict where this forced migration is going to take place, and basically begin to work with people to apply the research.
Great.
And come up with, maybe just models first, but then things that, as Rebecca said earlier, to be able to roll it out big. But we have enough science. We have enough people in the arts and in culture and in religion and in sociology and anthropology to help us craft some solutions to today's problems. But until we bring them together and say the payoff is in applying it, making the new type of water out of air, we have all these where we could actually change the availability of water and not have to live with, quote, the limitations we now have, but we don't apply it. And there's no rewards, there's no incentives, and there's huge costs to trying to implement. So for me, the biggest problem is the scientists are talking about the science and not about the people.
Well, let me build.
You wanted to say something, and then Serena and Phoebe. Yeah, Dirk, please.
Okay. Now let me build on that. I fully agree with what Richard said there. I mean, I would say there are a lot of technological solutions available. There is a lot of science available, but it's indeed about how to bring this science, how to bring these solutions to the market. And by market, I mean how to make them applied. Yeah. So, I mean, well, within the context of my own organization, we've come up there with an idea which we've been able to write quite well in the European research programs, which is the concept of what we call water unto living labs. Now, of course, the concept of living labs is not new, but center them around the concept of water, bringing together all the stakeholders involved. So the scientists, industry, I would say civil society, governance, bringing them all together and making them collaborate on the challenges. And then in addition to that, also set up the international collaboration to try to promote collaborations between, I would say, these living labs in a European context, with, for example, the other side of the Mediterranean. I think where we can exchange an experience on how to basically, build the economic models, the governance models, because I mean, another big issue here is about bringing the results to the market is where is the business case for water? Yeah. A lot of people, I would say, know the value of water. Few people know the price of water. And that, I think that's an issue. And perhaps I could add something else on that, because before we were speaking about the challenges. Now, I think the main challenges can be summarized in too much water, too little water, and too polluted water. Now, when we're speaking about the Mediterranean, we usually think about too little water. But I think increasingly with climate change, we could also, even in the Mediterranean, start considering too much water at certain moments, because I would say when it rains now, it comes with flash floods. So these are things we also should consider. Then I think there are two characteristics of water that make it a very difficult issue. One is the fragmentation of water. And when I see fragmentation, I both speak about horizontal fragmentation. So I would say along the water value chain. So municipal governments, regional governments, national governments, international, but also in the water value chain. I mean, I would say the utilities, the scientists, so the pillarization that has been addressed before. And I think to really try to address this is really, really very, very difficult. And it also brings about that the political awareness of the water topic is relatively limited. I mean, a lot of politicians pay lip service to the importance of water, but when it really comes to, I would say, acting on it, I would say water is not part of the key performance indicators of most, I would say, politicians, yeah, of civil servants. And I've seen a lot of progress there, to be honest, at least in the European context over the last 5 years, because when the previous European Commission was installed, we did an exercise to have an exchange with 15 different European commissioners to explain them the importance of water in their portfolio. Yeah. And then we had to still do a lot of missionary work, because a lot of commissioners, they didn't understand why water was important of them, including, and I'm not going to mention his name, but including the then Mediterranean European Commissioner of Human Disaster Management, who told us, no, I'm not interested in speaking to you because water is not relevant for my portfolio. Yeah.
Let me just insert in that, Dirk. There's a question from Richard Elelman that fits a bit with what you've been raising and also what others said about, you're talking about a deficit of politics. So Richard is asking, perhaps you can start, Dirk, but also the others, is the future then open democracy as opposed to representative government? And if so, are corporations and political parties the principal obstacles?
Well, that is a very difficult question, I would say. I'm not sure that's open. Well, I think by open governance, we mean direct democracy. Is that the interpretation I should give to that?
I can perhaps read something like that, but that's my own reading. I was just reading Richard's question verbatim, but yeah, there seems to be a bit of a critique of representative democracy there.
To give a proper answer to that, I think I need to give a few more political, philosophical considerations on democracy. Mm-hmm. I think a well-informed, I would say, well-informed citizens, those are what we needed. Now, whether they feed directly into policy making or indirectly, I think that's a discussion which is a bit more complicated.
I wanted to come back to science and then connect that with direct democracy. I mean, it's okay to have science for big theoretical issues. It's important. It's important because it creates the continuity of the platform on which our well-being depends. We should not underestimate science, and we should not underestimate the theoretical part of science. Of course, what is crucial is that the research institutions, the universities, are also very focused on empirical science, very focused on providing solutions of the real problems that we are facing. And not only that, but also have a way to connect to those that are going to potentially implement these solutions. So it's not even enough to have a big part of your research focus on empirical solution-making science. You need to connect that part with the politicians, the policymakers, the businesses, the financial institutions, the NGOs, the civil society as a whole. And together with that, you also need the technological innovations that are produced, and are usually the technological innovations, but also the social innovations that are produced within the spectrum of empirical science, to have the means and the financial and other means to commercialize these innovations. So you need technological and social innovation acceleration. So it's a lot of parts of a chain that starts from theoretical research to empirical research to research commercialization, and then also engaging the other stakeholders and empowering them to use these technological solutions, these social solutions. Empowering the society is important. And once you are confident that your educational system, your social system really provides the opportunity for accessing and understanding the information that are relevant for decision making, then you can move forward to having a more, a bigger democratization of decision making process. But before you do that, that is very, very dangerous, because we see how populists can influence the civil society in ways that are really very dangerous. And at the same time, we need to make sure that whenever we give the power to somebody to decide for the common good, this somebody has the information and the education to do so. And one step with regards to that would be to really showcase the importance of voting, the selection we do on that.
Thank you, Phoebe, for this very good point. Richard, I think you had some rebuttal or rejoinders.
Yeah, let me jump in on Phoebe's really nice sort of layout of science driving and then down to the obviously evidence-based and asking the person at the other end to just implement it. I know a great model, but I would flip it on its head. And I think what's missing has been understanding the problem and then doing the research rather than the research driving the problem. I'd rather have the fisherman who is coming home with less fish every day begin to describe a problem of what's happening with overfishing than I would have the researchers develop that there's a problem of overfishing and have a solution that doesn't fit the fisherman's culture. So I think you need that empowered group to help define the problem to be studied as well as the solution.
Serena?
Let me just get back just because it was addressed to me. I fully agree with you. And actually, in all the research projects that my team is participating and leading, much of our role, in addition to systems approaches and economics and pathway development, is implementing the systems innovation approach, which basically means co-designing with all the stakeholders the solution pathway. So the co-design approach is at the heart of what I think is important, both for science, for engagement of the relevant stakeholders, and at the end of the day, of the production of solution pathways that have a chance to be implemented. I've worked all around the world. Unless you co-design, nobody will implement the solution you give them. I fully agree with what you said.
You're muted, Serena. Sorry.
This is the way to avoid that I talk too much. So, no, but what I want to say is just that I'm just now slightly critical. I fully agree on the implementation, on looking for solution-oriented research, but I would also be a sustainer, despite I'm more a practical approach researcher, that basic research is always fundamental to know that probably there might be a problem in the future so that we can look for solution afterward and ask the right question. So I would still keep the very empirical research living together. Maybe just one point to the implementation and then therefore to the politics. I think that we have already implemented cases. What we don't have is the upscale, because the research brings most often down to the creation, a model, a prototype, and maybe then we hear what Adil just said, that I have not heard about it. So I get not the upscaling of what is created in such a living lab, but that is where then the involvement of the different stakeholders, in my opinion, should gather together to break down the barriers that hampers then the upscale of such or existing solution that might be already co-designed. I know plenty of amazing solutions that have remained in a niche, and this is just a pity because there is a really huge effort on that side. And that is the same for the politics. Informed stakeholders, informed groups then do create sustainable and right, or at least wise solution. Over.
So we have Richard also following up on the same issues that you are debating. So then isn't surely education is the best weapon to avoid populism? Also fitting what Phoebe said, shouldn't we ensure a far more effective education system across the Mediterranean? So I hear some critique to the Mediterranean systems here too.
Could you please recall the question? I didn't hear it well.
As a follow-up on the populism democracy debate, Richard is saying, should we not ensure a far more effective education system across the Mediterranean, on issues to fight climate change and similar, and also to avoid populism? Surely education is the best weapon, saying it as a rhetorical statement. So is education the way forward, and are there issues with the education system in the Mediterranean region or Mediterranean countries that we need to address? Dirk, I saw your hands moving, so it sounded like you probably have something to say about that. You're muted, sorry.
While we were having this discussion, I fully agree. For me, to have an effective democracy, you do not only need an I would say a formal system. You also need a very well informed, I would say, electorate, and you need I would say make sure that your electorate has access to all the sources of information. Yeah, and of course the intellectual tools at every level of education to make their choices. Now I think, and I'm going to limit my perspective now to the Western world, yeah, and look at the diversity we have in there already. I think, and if you make the parallel now with the COVID-19 crisis and the solutions and the diversity and the whole discussions we have on that, my question back to Richard, to you was, would you have confidence, yeah, in the electorate, yeah, to come up with the solutions for COVID-19 crisis? Yeah, and I think that answer to that question will probably very much differ from, well, region to region, even if in the Western world. So, because then again, what is good education? And we can have a long debate on that, because I mean, for some people, good education will be purely scientific. Yeah. For other people, I mean, with a religious background, yeah, that will also include, and again, I'm looking within the European context, because I myself, I'm from a country which is usually considered quite liberal, but we have our own Dutch Bible Belt, where I would say they have very conservative views. People are not vaccinated. Television is considered as the instrument of the devil. And where I would say Darwinism will be denied. Yeah, for people, for let's say a part of the population, good education also includes information on that kind of perspective. So I think it's a very difficult debate.
Indeed,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, indeed is a very difficult debate. If you look at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network report on the implementation of the SDGs, and you go to the SDG that is relevant for education, and you look at the map of implementation of this SDG. And let me describe this SDG 4, which says ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. If you go to the map that shows the level of achievement of this SDG, it is very disheartening for the Mediterranean region. And it's one of the less well-performing SDGs around the world. It is measured with regards to participation in education, but also scores with regards to science and technology exams, and also variation in science performance and explained by socioeconomic status. So education is a real problem in our region, not only in our region, but in our region, a real problem. Definitely, and it is not just the quality of education, but the ability of education to connect with the very fast pace of technological advancement. Never before did we have, because before the fourth industrial revolution, such a pace in technological advancement. As a result, we don't really know if we are able, as labor force, let's say, to really keep up to this pace. And at the same time, we know that the only way out from our climate and biodiversity crisis is technology. Renewable, circular economy, nature-based solutions. So we have a very difficult challenge ahead of us.
I wonder, when we're saying education, if we're including the role of the press and social media, because, you know, people get their quote education from all different sources. And at least in the United States, and my experience in Europe and Africa, et cetera, is that somehow those sources are more believable often than science is believable. And on the other hand, we've seen that political solutions often come after the press has put something on the front page. In the United States, we had bad water in Flint, Michigan, been there for some time until it was in the press. Nothing happened. Once it was in the press, the politicians and the community felt obligated to solve it. And we've been very quiet about the role of social media, the role of the press in helping us arrive at these solutions, or maybe they are a barrier. So the question is, are they helpful or are they a barrier to solutions?
Richard, let me push you further on that, because I think Phoebe made a very important, although quite controversial point from certain perspective, not necessarily mine. At one point she said quite clearly, look, we can't just say open democracy. And I think perhaps she had in mind when she mentioned populism, what you're saying, digital democracy is also social media with no filters and alternative theories on climate and health and vaccination and all of that. So I want to kind of push a bit harder. So perhaps try to be less politically correct, all of you, and, you know, on your different views. I mean, it's easy to talk about, yeah, we can have higher education, but yeah, then, you know, Dirk, your country is doing quite bad on the vaccination front, if I may say, compared to the South. So, you know, but, you know, the Southern European countries that are not well known for education, they're doing much better. So we're seeing Sweden, let's not talk about it, even though they're the most advanced in sustainability. But when it comes to COVID, you know, other issues there. So the point is, even if we improve the education system, even if we have all these social platforms and the consensus and the scientists going out there, what are we going to do about the control of information? It seems to be a pretty key thing for science. Science is about information and a certain procedures to verify that that information is correct and valid and socially productive.
Well, perhaps it also has to do with the maturity of the way, of the means by which we share information. Yeah, I think, I mean, when the, I would say the print press was introduced, like in the 15th, 16th century. Yeah, we saw a lot of social upheaval, which can to a certain degree be connected with the fact that we had a new ways of communication, which allowed, I would say, information to be shared much more easily and disseminated. To a certain degree, you could say that social media that we have now, I would say, brings about a similar process where, once again, there is a way to share information which is new, and we as a society, we have not really, I would say, well, evolved with it to use it to the benefit, because of course, in the end, it's like with dynamite, any technology can be used to the good and the bad of humanity. Yeah, so I think we as a society probably also need to learn how to deal with these social media. I think by itself, social media is not good or bad. It's how we deal with them.
But Dirk, let me take you on that. Sorry if I pick on you, but it's because you have the more blunt, you know, provocations. But what about Francis Hogan and Facebook just dropping algorithms in certain countries where, you know, in Ethiopia, you can just have ethnic fights because Facebook doesn't control? That doesn't seem to be much of a learning process. That just seems to be a very clear strategy from certain companies, what to allow and what not to allow. How do you deal with that?
I think that we don't have regulation for that yet in place.
Yeah, but let me come back to that in a second. Firstly, I wanted to finish my point. I think in our we're back to education. We also need to learn, yeah, our young people how to deal with social media, yeah, how they should use it. Yeah. Now, second point is, indeed, but what you're saying there, I think, is a very dangerous point. Yeah, because now we're speaking about regulating how social media can operate. Yeah, which is similar to saying how can newspaper editors, how can they use newspapers? What can they say and what can't they say? I think once we go down that path, yeah, I mean, whatever we do,
there's section 21 for all media, yeah? There's section 21 for all media, meaning in American terms, meaning that if you're writing on a newspaper, you are criminally liable for anything you write to the editor. Zuckerberg and anybody on social media, they have no criminal liability, even if you have Christchurch shooting, like live stream live. So actually media is highly regulated before social media. Perhaps I'll pass it to Serena. She was talking about regulation.
I'm speaking about opinions, not about facts. But
no, I think that when I was talking about regulation, it's not of what can be said or what cannot be said, but the boundary in which information can be provided and how they are served. So as said, that, you know, in the newspaper, we are liable, so to say the truth or not, for example, but that is not the case for these social media. And I maybe want to say something in relation also to youth and non-youth. I think that the youth is way more aware on how to use social media rather than a middle-aged person that I am, because were born in the 80s, where many of these digitalization has taken place, and the speed in which the things have been changed, we are still in this middle way on thinking on the old system thinking and the newer one. And most of the people that do pick up, for example, on fake news are not the young people, it's not the youth, but it's rather the age between 40 and 60 years old. So I think that the education should come in terms of general awareness, but regulation more into which are the boundaries. We speak a lot about data privacy and so on. And I think in the same way, certain boundaries should be also placed in what can be provided and streamed, but not forbidding freedom of right to say or express their own belief. Yeah, that was my right understanding. And in that, I think we can do also much. There are also a lot of new, for example, NGOs that are also working on going into schools or even in classes for adults to teach about the risk behind fake news and how to handle them and so on. So this is another type of education. We return to the same point that education can act at different level and at different stage. And maybe here I stop. Thank you.
May I ask a question to VITO, because he made the point about the press and the American law, which I mean, I'm not aware of, but very, very happy. Now, does this also apply to Fox Television?
Yeah, it does actually. In theory, we can bring Fox to court. We can, yeah, but I mean, that's perhaps America. Richard can tell us about that. But I would say in the Mediterranean context, with quite a strong history of pluralist media, America is a bit of an outlier. Sorry if I allow myself as a panel moderator to reply to Dirk. I think in the Mediterranean region and in a lot of countries, we've seen a serious change from the social media, because the media were always heavily regulated before the era. So I think that's something to talk about. And they've always been very pluralistic, I mean, to be honest, on the whole. At least that's what we write in books. Now, no, of course, we have to take the media scholar. So but even Fox, we can technically bring them to court. We can bring Zuckerberg to court for what we write on Facebook, fundamentally.
But apparently nobody does so, because it's practically difficult, probably.
Richard, let's leave it, because you can tell us a bit about America, perhaps America and the Mediterranean. That, I think, is an interesting debate too. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so I think it's clear that there are two phenomena happening now. And it sort of therefore makes it even sort of like on steroids, if you would. One is there is a craving for instant information. And now it's possible. And number two is there is a craving for instant information that supports my view. I would say in the ancient days, some of us there may just be at the other edge of the middle, and was that you expected the press to give you both sides of the perspective. And so therefore, if you were interested in a topic, that you somehow got both sides and it was left to us to decide which side you wanted to be on. So to speak. The newer phenomena is I only want to hear from people that share my view. And we see that professionally, we see it politically. And so in the United States, it is a very big problem that people who watch their news on Fox also seem to be high users of certain sites on social media. And those who get their news on CNN also have a proclivity to only get their news from social media that supports their view. And I think that, for me, is a more disturbing phenomenon than the growth of social media and you know, we talk about Facebook and those sorts of things. The younger generation thinks of that as regular, the same way we think of regular mail compared to email. So it's TikTok, it's, you know, it's a bunch of things that are really, and even TED Talks were too long for most of the generation that's there. And now it's TEDx, and pretty soon we'll have half TEDx or something. So I think it's not the regulation or unregulation that is most disturbing to me. It is the fact that we want to stay in our own circle. And all the things that Phoebe and Serena and Dirk and all have been talking about, which is broadening the platform of people who don't necessarily think the way I do, from science to, you know, those most affected, to the culture, to the press, and bring them together. There is a phenomenon in the United States that says we don't want to be together. We want to be with, quote, our people. And I think that is one of the most significant barriers to any form of democracy or solutions to some of the important problems that HADEEL talked about earlier, or I guess we all talked about in our way of bringing people together. So for me, it is that phenomena that has been maybe encouraged or driven by social media that is most disturbing, because it prevents us from bringing people together that may not share that view, so that we can then do the systems thinking that Phoebe was talking about, and she and I both teach, to get people to talk about that and to arrive at a consensus of a view that you can have a solution that will be implemented and be sustainable.
Yeah. And if we think at this level, that also goes within governments. I mean, it has happened to us in the past that where we were trying to, well, what we say, applying the nexus, so going back into government and try to address for a multifaceted approach solution, try to find a co-design solution. There has been major obstacle directly within the technical table or the ministries of such a government to try to find data sharing as well, and also share of responsibility. There is also a role in which, going back to being in the same circle, people tend to stay within their own role without having the braveness, you know, what Phoebe said, to be brave and step over and really look for real cooperation. Data sharing, now talking, is not only in science, but in major decision-making processes, the other bigger problem that often we look for information and double work that is already present within the same institution, I would say, but different offices. Over.
Okay, well, bringing it back a bit to the topic, but I think this was a good, foray in other really key issues. So about climate change, I think we started with that. That was, and I think in your expertise is one of the threads, of course, together with all the other issues that we agreed are connected to that. If we had to flip it a bit, we have talked quite a lot about the crisis of the Mediterranean, and even now with social media about somewhat things that come from outside. Not that we don't use social media, but we don't really control it. But what is that we can teach? So beyond all the negatives and the stereotypes and the really real crisis that we have, what can we teach from the Mediterranean to other parts of the world?
Well, I think at least the part of the Mediterranean that is part of Europe has the biggest leadership example in terms of transformation during peace. At the moment, what Europe is trying to do with the European Green Deal is really very courageous. Because what we are doing is that we are bringing together 9 different policies in order to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, in order to achieve reduction of pollution and protection of human health, in order to achieve clean tech leadership by European companies, and do all this without leaving anyone behind. So this growth strategy that it is supported by the 9 European Green Deal different policies is really impressive, and it is not just policies and blah, blah, blah. It is also 1 trillion backing the European Green Deal, and in addition to that, 750 billion from the coronavirus induced EU Next Generation policy instrument. So the Europe is investing 1/4 of its budget of the multi-annual financial framework to the transition to climate neutrality and biodiversity resilience, and tries to achieve through that transition growth, job creation, and social cohesion. Why is this courageous? Why I think this investment in the green and digital transition that survived even the huge non-linearity of the pandemic, why do I think that this is courageous? It is courageous because we think that we see that, and it was obvious during the last COP, China has announced climate neutrality by 2060. India insists on 2070. And to talk about the other 2 emitters, Europe has not just announced, but has already implemented policies towards 2050 climate neutrality, while the US is not committing to anything really, but committing not to support fossil fuel and gas outside the US. So given this very interesting geopolitical, and I'm only talking about the 4 bigger emitters, there are other emitters as well. But looking at this very interesting geopolitical game, let's say, Europe takes the role of leading the way, showcasing how the transition can be implemented through implementing the European climate law, through implementing the EU taxonomy and the sustainability and the proposal for the corporate sustainability directive, through implementing the Fit for 55, 13 different regulations for the transition to climate neutrality of each and every section of the economy, but at the same time is risking losing competitiveness and losing a big part of the global market, and being locked in commitments and policy and regulation structures that will not be endorsed by its trading partners. And this is a big risk for our welfare, but at the same time, not doing anything about climate change and not showcasing the example of the transition as a continent, as a country that really knows how to do it, it would also be risky. So these are very difficult times for the leaders of Europe, especially given the inability, it seems, of China and US and India to really believe in this climate transition. And of course, I can see the Global South point of view. The Global South does not have the fiscal space to invest in the infrastructural and technological transformation that is needed. And it's saying that you have developed and now you are asking me to develop, but at a much higher cost. So what is needed here is to have the US on board and maybe China on board and create the multilateral system for developing multilateral banks, provide them with finance in order to be able to support the transition and engage in this transition for our sake as developed countries, but also for the sake of the developing countries. So it's a very complicated geopolitical structure that we need to handle at the moment.
Phoebe, thank you for that. I want to push a bit on the Mediterranean part, and sorry for my subtle critique if you allow me for debate. I hear quite a lot of Europe, not just from you, but very little Mediterranean. So Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, Tunisia, Morocco, they are not in Europe. I mean, at least not in the formal understanding that we have. So
but they are much closer. They are much closer to the directives and policies. There are many initiatives of Europe for Northern Africa, for the Mediterranean. It's PRIMA initiative on the water, food, energy nexus, but also as a policy priority, Northern Africa, the whole of Africa, but also Northern Africa is very important for Europe. So I would consider Mediterranean as a part of the world that can really show how these developed and developing parts can join efforts in this sustainability transition, following what is there in terms of the European part of the Mediterranean, and at the same time trying to transpose that to the Northern African part of the Mediterranean, but of course understanding and taking into account the differences in terms of socioeconomic structures and policies and regulations, and also political and policy differences between the two parts of Mediterranean.
Maybe, yeah, maybe let me go also to further elaborate on what also Phoebe was saying, that I think the other part that I think we as a Mediterranean could be proud of is also the way it's despite the geographics as mostly divided on low and middle income countries or high income countries, I think there is a lesson learned that we could merge potentially together. I fully agree on what Phoebe said, that we were one of the countries with the longest peace where we could lead to transformation. But on the other side, and the European Union now is providing this bridge to the other side of the Mediterranean, allow me to say like that. And it's really moving towards the creating equity or equality, let's say, to melange to address climate change issue. And the Green Deal is also creating two pillars that bridge to the other side of the Mediterranean itself. On the other side, from the, let's say, from the other side of the Mediterranean, what we can learn there is that with few resources, there are already functioning business models and as well implementation path to tackle climate change. And this is also what we call it in a sustainable or in nature-based solution. They really do apply because there they have the striving to grow in economy. So we have this barrier, I call it always the X of barrier, where policies then derive into innovation, but on the other side of the Mediterranean, there are innovations coming up due to necessity to deal, and we need to support them also to foster, to create a path for good policies implementation there. So I think we are on the two extreme, and if we are good enough to bring those two parts on the same table, I think we could have a strength also to manage and tackle many other issues. Over.
HADEEL, what would you say is the perspective from outside the formal boundaries of Europe? How do you see from Palestine this Green Deal and these discussions that we're having about this European/Mediterranean policies on climate and transitions?
Maybe as Palestinian, we also have some policies and strategies regarding adaptation to climate change. After joining Paris Agreement, we have established our own national adaptation strategy. And we have also developed the action plan regarding to it. And many ministries are involved in applying this action plan. And something important about lessons learned from other European countries, I think sharing information and knowledge from all people working on the process of resistance to climate change can help us in developing our strategies and policies. It's only 5 years we are working on adaptation, the climate change, but something is important that some countries are affecting the climate change and other countries are affected by. Even we are in Palestine, not affecting to cause the climate change, but we are very affected by it, and we have flood, we have risk. All this comprehensive process of knowing the experience of other countries and learning from it is very important, neither for me as a Palestinian or for any countries, neither in the Europe or in the Middle East countries. And also all the scenarios they have in Green Deals, the project they are doing, it will be a lesson learned for us in order to continue our work in facing the climate change and to get best practice. There are a lot of success stories from each country we can learn from. Over.
But we should be aware that maybe it's not the solution, right? Because each best practice do work in the geographic context, political context. So it's really, I would say that these north-south best practices, I think, should at a certain point stop, or at least be adapted on what we say, co-design, because you are the one, they are the owner of the political context as well as the facing the problematics. And I think what could it be? It's more knowledge sharing rather than best practices. Best practices are the one that your government or your local organization or your local community would take over, learning from what is then the so-called sustainability aspect or policy impact that you could create in your own country. I think this is really what we have learned also in the SDG agenda and the way also how the United Nations have been working the past 20 years, 30 years. And we have seen that this north-south hasn't worked. That's what Phoebe say. No co-design. There are no other ways than co-designing within your area. And of course, when it creates transboundary situation also with transboundary partner. I really would like to stress this because I think this is fundamental also for own growth in the basin of the Mediterranean.
Go ahead.
Dirk, then Adil. Yep.
VITO, to become perhaps a little bit more controversial on this topic. Yeah.
You're taking that role, so you apologies for me taking you on. It was for the sake of debate, so please go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, we've heard that, the perceived European leadership with regard to the European Green Deal and climate policy could be perceived as courageous. You could also see, let's say, I think make the case that it's a very well understood self-interest. Yeah, both in terms of the one who first addresses the issue will also probably first develop the solutions that and create the market for those solutions. And on the other hand, if you see how Europe is geographically placed, yeah, and now I'm going to make the link with migration. Yeah, if these, I would say, if climate-related issues in the areas around Europe are not properly addressed and worsened, it will probably lead to a bigger, I would say, migration pressure on the European Union. Yeah, which I would say could cause some political stress within different countries in the European Union.
Adil, Perhaps, I don't know if you wanted to follow up on this, on Dirk's points.
No, it's on Miss Serena. But what is important, I know every country has its own conditions, its own situation. And also in Palestine, we have our unique situation. But at the end, every country has the experience with their regulation, rules, situation, geographic and environmental issues. But at the end, when I'm talking about knowledge and sharing information, we get what is suitable for us. We know the best practice in your whole process, and we adapt it to our situation. Our situation have a lot of obstacles since years, and maybe it will follow for the years ahead. But at the end, we have to deal with it. We have to go forward. We have to work on staying here, building our state, having our own resources, developing it, working on the sustainability of our resources. So that's what I really mean by knowledge and sharing experience and best practice. Over.
Yeah. I sort of want to respond to that because Serena raised early on the issue of how do we scale this? I mean, we have a lot of little, I don't want to minimize them, but little successful projects. They may be successful for a whole community. And we saw it with COVID, with what the Joint Commission, Joint Research Center did with the water and identifying in sewer water COVID and being able to do some great things and then spread it throughout. I know, for instance, in Palestine, they've been able to take some other solutions, solar, and drive a lot of change in energy availability and energy use. So there's two things that are needed, I think. One is the ability to have science be more of like an embassy, if you would, in a local area that understands that local area issue. And as we talked in the system design, not to use a cliche, but to have the end user or the people most effective help design both the problem statement and the solution. But there are a lot of things, if we could develop I don't want to call it a library because that sounds stagnant, but a social media platform that we could share those ideas so that people who have less resources, less research resources, less innovative money to try things that don't work, could pick them off. And then, as HADEEL talked about, be able to say, oh, well, here's something, it doesn't quite work for our people, but if we, twist it this way or only use part of it, we could start with a big head start rather than everybody having to reinvent the wheel. So I think we need two things. We need something at the local level that helps science become applied with the science and the technology that we have now, hooked into that local social fabric that's integrated with everybody from the press and the politicians and the business community, and have real economic and social incentives built in so that it will be sustainable and live. And something that would be more of here's something that's worked. Does anybody want to take a piece of it or a part of it? And what I heard HADEEL talking about was not only are we scarce in water, but we might be scarce in the sort of what's worked in other places, and we don't have the resources to start all over all the time. So it seems to me that something that could be helpful is not only helping build a social platform that brings all those people together, but something that can transmit successful and unsuccessful innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Phoebe, I also saw you shaking your head to Dirk. Sorry to come back a bit to Dirk's point, but I wanted to also to pick up on those points that Dirk had made. I don't know if you had something you wanted to add there.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I agree with Richard. We need some information channel that will transfer the success and no success stories, the failures. And at some point, as SDSN Mediterranean, we thought of having on the 6 transformations that I mentioned at the beginning, decarbonization, land use, digitalization, sustainable communities, welfare, and health. We thought of having countries from European Mediterranean connecting one by one with countries from African Mediterranean and transmitting solutions in terms of the 6 transformation pathways and the way that we would implement this. And this is something that we are currently working is mobilize the hubs, the SDSN hubs that we have in each and every country and create the connection pathways. And because the SDSN hubs include as members of the research and innovation institutions of each and every country, but also create a pool of all other relevant stakeholders for the different transformations. This, I think, could be an interesting idea that has the capacity to really accelerate Richard's idea, how you can transfer technology and know-how and information, and then be able in a way to scale up the case study successes. Now, with regards to and there is also another SDSN initiative in Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East that are very, a climate change initiative that are very vulnerable. As HADEEL said, it is unfortunate that those who create the climate change are not, on average, those that suffer more by it. So there are equity and justice issues in there, and Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East are really vulnerable areas, one of the hotspots of climate change. Now, with regards to what Dirk said, obviously, the European Green Deal, it's an opportunity for Europe, but it's a huge risk as well. I am directing the EIT Climate Kick Hub of the country and very involved in the central management of Climate Kick. This belongs to the European Institute of Innovation and Technology and is the biggest public-private partnership with regards to accelerating innovations that are relevant to the transition to a climate neutral economy. And there, I can tell you that we are not the leaders with regards to climate neutral technology. We are not yet, as Europe, pioneers. We are not those that have most of the relevant technology in their hands. So we are promising and we are regulating and we are creating laws and commitments for a technological transition, basically, because it's about the energy system and the land use system and the mobility system. And we do not own this technology. So this technology is owned partly by us, but but quite a lot of it from US and China. So it is dangerous. It is a big opportunity. There are ways that we sketch our pathways, and actually we've run a general equilibrium model where we showcase that implementing the European Green Deal not only increases increases equity between the different regions of Europe, but it can, if implemented cleverly, it can also increase jobs, it can increase growth, and it can increase, as I said, equity in all the different regions of Europe. However, it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do if you are doing that alone,
Thank you for that. And as we go towards the end, and thank you, Phoebe, also for being able to manage your very clear thinking, even with other interruption. That's very good. So we enjoyed that part too. So just as we go towards the end, I think we're wrapping up in a few minutes, and I think this has been very exciting and very interesting. I want to pick up at least one point that Dirk put there and push it even more controversial with my own contribution, so I acknowledge that. I think Dirk said quite clearly, at least that's how I interpret it, okay, this is about markets. And of course, the bottom line is always that, whether we agree with markets or not, if we focus on the economy, we know that that is really important. So to throw a bit of, a spanner in the works, perhaps I'm being a bit also prejudiced, Mediterranean, a bit also too negative about my own region or where I come from. I'm a Southern Italian from Apulia. But, being here in the Nordic, I'm seeing digitalization and sustainability being the main agendas for I don't know how long. Huge investment of money, and I don't think we are the leaders by far in US-China terms, but basically startups everywhere, the latest technology. So I think, okay, but what's going to happen in the Mediterranean? Let's even take out now the separation Europe-Mediterranean, but Italy, Morocco, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon. Are we just going to be at the end, at the consuming end of this? Where it's our investments? Where it's our base to make that?
Israel is a leader.
Or is this just a point, good point, Phoebe, Israel in that, but what about, for instance, Northern Europe versus, the rest of the Mediterranean? Are we just, is the European Green Deal then just going to favor a few countries and be another kind of colonization in disguise? Yeah. Dirk, you want to perhaps pick it up from there?
I would say this is more up to the Mediterraneans to judge. I mean, I can even make it a bit more controversial. Yeah, I mean, I think the European Green Deal indeed creates big opportunities. Yeah, will the people of the Mediterranean, be able to organize themselves to reap the opportunities?
Okay, so we got two sides here. So we go to the end. Let's make it a bit thing. So, and I pick on Dirk even since he's been saying the implementation. So on one side, it looks like, okay, it's a bit our responsibility. I say our as Mediterranean, which I don't discard completely. But I want to put a bit more brutal the level of inequality. I mean, Italy does not have, Greece or Palestine in even more oppressed, much more oppressed situation, Spain, Portugal. We don't have the level of investments. We're also dealing with public debt. We're dealing with so many other economic factors. We just don't have.
And probably we're going to increase ours.
Yeah, but Elena, please take us on. Yeah.
No, it's just that now we are also in for example, speaking now about Italy, where is the point in which fundings, let's say joint fundings from the European Union will come into Italy as a debt, as well as we might increase our debt. This is clear. And this could be a chance in the leverage, for example, in which potentially sustainability and digitalization should take up. What I see is the organizational level of local governments to be educated on picking up on those issues. It's not really, it's the downscaling of big measures that, in my opinion, are missing. And this is where also the other part of education, in my opinion, should be also taken up by the European Union in general and say, okay, this is not only the level of investment, but also the means and pick up on opportunities by knowledge. And I think we are far behind also on that level. So I re-stress again, education that doesn't lead to community only, not at school, not in the social media, but I think also at the technical offices or at least at the ministerial cabinets where decisions are really taken on the redistribution of such funds. And that's where the Green Deal is really trying to push on and giving guidelines. And this is really, I'm really appreciating that. But for example, in our, and this is my critical opinion, we are far from optimizing, in my opinion, the resource. I'm trying more and more to see the agenda on how Italy would spend on those two pillars, sustainability and digitalization. I still have a problem to see the implementation. Over, maybe too critical.
No, but let's also, because Vito, you're almost suggesting, I think, it's a nice point, that I would say large investments need to be made to deal with these matters, and Mediterranean countries may not have the resources to do that because they're already very much indebted. I mean, I think it's exactly one of the innovations of the European Green Deal and the EU Next Generation Fund, that for the first time at European level, large amounts of funds are made available, as I would say at European level. So you don't need to increase your Italian debt. No, if there is a large amount of money available from the European level, and it's up to Italy now, it's up to Spain now, it's up to Portugal now to spend this money, I would say, in a way, which improves your, I would say, your competitiveness.
I agree 100%. It is now the time. We have this EU Next Generation. Italy and Greece are one of the higher budgets in terms of percentage. This is not good, of course, because it means that we need more help than others. But we, at this time, have the money for the infrastructural transformation that is needed before we start implementing the transition, before we are able to have the grid that can really connect renewables, before we are able to implement e-mobility and so on. So now is the time. And if you look at the recovery and resilience plans of the country, they are really focused on the green and digital, because they had to be 37% climate mainstream and 20% digital mainstream. My only worry, my critique, is not that, I mean, we submitted the plans and they are green and digital. My only worry is that they were baptized green and digital. So these were the investments that they already had in mind to do, and they try to make them look as green and digital as they could. I'm part of the committee on the country on this, but there was no other way to do this.
It was very short time.
Exactly. And the other thing is that not only it was so rushed, pressured, also the absorption of the money needs to be extremely fast. This is twice the money that we have for our cohesion funds, and for the cohesion funds we have 7 years to absorb. Now we have twice the money to absorb them in 3 or 4 years. So we need to accelerate this, and we need a lot of luck as well.
I agree.
Good. I'll finish with one last question from Richard. I think more perhaps as a short pitch from all of you, visionary, and perhaps also on the more positive side of all the conflicts and the divisions that characterize our dear region today. We are reading from Richard's question. We are discussing in Cassandra the Mediterranean and the importance of working together. Is it possible in a region of such diversity to really create a Mediterranean awareness and approach? Phoebe?
I'm usually the first one to start. Please. So I am positive. My life experience has shown to me that this area has very strong links, has similarities, and knows how to work together irrespective of the geopolitical issues. So we can definitely work together. There are case studies that show that in a very successful way. Let's scale them up in a clever, green, and digital way to save ourselves and our children.
Okay, maybe I go next. And then I say that, yes, it's possible. We have shown extremely high resilience in time of also conflict and difficulties. And I think one of the things that makes us together is really in the moment of need, we are able to show cohesion despite the difficulties. So I think this is possible, but it's not possible without a systemic thinking and a coherent transdisciplinary approach that will look in different time and scale. And what we call nexus, what we would call system thinking or co-design solution, I think all these words lead to cross-boundary, but also an understanding of barriers and stake without playing just with political will, but more with science-based and innovation-oriented solution. Over.
So I would say diversity also implies a wealth of potential solutions. So in that sense, I would be very positive.
HADEEL, I think you
for
were
me,
muted.
very fruitful cooperation, and fortunately, I was part of one of these cooperation between the Mediterranean, as one member group of the water expert group, which was handled from the Union for Mediterranean and under the EU. And we have made a very good job regarding the whole 43 Mediterranean countries. We have a ministerial declaration regarding the water agenda. We have thematic group working on nexus and immigration, on climate change. So cooperation between the Mediterranean countries is very, very fruitful and successful. And it takes technical and political visions. So it will be a very fruitful and will have a good consequence on the ground and very concrete results. Over.
Richard, a few final words before I wrap up.
Yeah, no, I'm very optimistic, and we keep talking about the Mediterranean or Europe as if you guys live on a different planet. And almost everything that happens as we talk about climate is Earth view of it. And so what happens in China doesn't stay in China, so to speak. What happens in the US doesn't stay. So I'm very optimistic. I think, we may have to change some of the rhetoric and the names. So climate change may now have political tails to it. But if you talk about abundance of water in certain areas, flooding, or if you talk about droughts, that seems to be a problem that we can work on that doesn't necessarily have the political sort of tails to it. So I think one is we got to think about the words that we use. Number two is, I think if we focus on building this platform that allows the diversity of people to come together and work on that as a real problem, because I think it is a real problem and something that needs to be done. And if we can build that platform that brings people together who are different, who are affected by the problem, who have an economic interest in the problem, who have a political interest in the problem, we can solve anything. I'm always reminded that, things that 25 years ago we thought are impossible are all here today. In fact, if you look at the inventions, innovations, everything that happened today, people 20 years ago said that's impossible. Impossible to take a rocket up and bring it back down and reuse it. It's impossible to have your computer on your watch. we have it. So we know that we have the capability to solve any problem if we actually are committed to the same purpose and to solve it. And so I'm very optimistic. I think it has now gotten the level of attention that it needs. I think we don't have quite the right words and the right ability to keep, in general, the right people together because of a lot of sort of static in the system. But if we build a social platform that includes the diversity and the science in together and talk about applied sort of real live projects that are sustainable on the ground, we can do it, and we can do it within the 20-year time frame.
Thank you, Richard. So first of all, just to wrap up, thank you so much to all of you. I really learned a lot, and I really hope our conference attendees have just learned as much as me. But on a positive note, and I think the very positive note is that we can do social consensus. So I really appreciate it, despite my multiple provocations, which I was tasked by the organizer to keep, some lively debate, that we actually all come together as one, and we actually focus much more on the positives and what brings us together than the differences and the divisions. But I do want to say a couple of things, perhaps more critical, just to think about. It's not for the panelists, but it's for all of us. I think the issues of economic inequalities and geopolitical powers are not going to disappear. Second, I would have hoped to hear a bit more on Mediterranean pride than just Europe. I just leave it there as a provocation. I do think even for Southern Europe, there's much more in the Mediterranean than on the other part. And third, I think the big elephant in the room, very good European Green Deal, but Frontex, what's happening in Palestine and Israel, is not acceptable. Thank you all, and we'll continue now with the conclusion of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.